Hello and thank you for tuning into the Stampscapes.com channel. This is a scene that's, it's not really so much of a Stampscapes dominant scene, although I've used the Stampscapes imagery to kind of create a setting for all of these little different creatures in here and different stamps from my private collection that I've collected over the years. And on this scene right here, it's been a situation where I've even stamped out a couple of the images for the first time. There's a bat up here and this urn right over here, and I've never used them before, but I probably bought them 20 years ago. But anyways, I wanted to stamp out a bunch of these little collection of images, and I wanted it to kind of be a lesson on spotlighting, okay, and bringing in creating a kind of a cohesive setting for a lot of different imagery. Okay, now oftentimes in my videos I say that you know, the approach for scenic stamping that I take is I see it more like creating a stage set or a stage piece or whatever, a set piece, than in trying to depict, you know, kind of a scene that's part of a greater whole. And I think it's just easier to do it that way, you know. As far as a thought process goes, here's all these little creatures in here, and what I've done is I've tried to create a situation where all of them kind of stand out, you know, maybe as somewhat equal players. I mean, that bat is kind of in there in the darkness, but you can kind of create a setting where you're almost doing kind of spotlighting. If you think of your scenes as more like a stage, then you can kind of create your lighting wherever you want it to go, you know, because you have in a stage you have use of, you know, as many lights as you know, can possibly get a hold of, and you can, you know, direct the viewer's eye to whatever you want the viewer to be looking at. So anyway, through the use of a lot of different values in here, this is very simple composition I've used. In terms of my landscape imagery, I've used my spruce tree here in the distance here in variations of value, very light values of black, okay, by stamping it out and blotting off some of the bottom parts. And the structure of this scene is using the Sedge filler stamp for this whole area down here, but then I do go in and I do some paper towel masking to create some variations within that area. And then I do have this spooky branch overhang over the top of it here, but just some very basic textural elements in here, and you know, you can create a nice setting for as many kind of separate different images as you have. And I've done that by creating this setting, but in terms of the coloring scheme, it's a strong vignette. It's darker around the imagery, and then I've used the foreground images to also kind of frame off the scenes. So this is something that I do on most of my scenes. It's just darker on the outside edge, and there's a couple areas of light. It's lighter up here, goes darker across here, and it's light down here, so it's light, dark, light. You'll see that in 90% of my scenes, but this one just happens to be a very much longer one with a bunch of little characters in here. But that same kind of structuring works for something like this. And I love, you know, for something like this, a little whimsical touch, I've kind of added these little glowing little, I don't know, whatever, they could be like little fairies or something like that, glowing in the setting, kind of bringing everything to life, or, I don't know, kind of creating a nice little light show for all of our little characters that have come out to play in this little kind of midnight Halloween rendezvous. So anyways, if you choose to watch the video, I hope you enjoy it, and happy Halloween to everyone, and thanks as always for tuning into the Stampscapes channel. Okay, let's see if we can't do a quick and easy lesson on spotlighting. We have a lot of different little images here from various companies, just collected over the years, and I don't know, I thought they would make a nice little kind of playful collection of these little characters kind of getting together on, you know, kind of a Halloween night type of scenario. So let's see if we can kind of bring these, what do we have here? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little characters. Here's this little, what an urn type of image from Edward Gorey here as well together. So we have 8 different things that we need to kind of bring together in somewhat of a cohesive manner. And we want to spotlight them all so then, you know, none of them are too obscure. And we want to have some sort of focal point as well to this. I guess it would be to kind of like an illustration here, okay? I'm using Sedge filler, which is a good grassy texture filler. I'm kind of changing the angle slightly and giving this kind of a little, I don't know, little hill or bluff type of configuration right here. Overlapping, I was overlapping probably about a 1/4 inch into the previous design too, okay? So trying to avoid kind of too much of a, you know, too stacked of a look, you know, and re-inking every, I don't know, 3 impressions or so. Most of the times I had kind of the pressure right on my finger right here, and you don't want to rock this, otherwise, you know, you'll get the edges too distinct like that, okay? So good firm, but even pressure. Okay, so we have this little foundation right here, and this is the largest image, this little baby skeleton by Onion Arts. I believe they were affiliated with Imagine Air Designs, and if you're a long-time stamper, you might recognize that name. A lot of aeronautical illustrations, very detailed and accurate designs of airplanes. They might have had some trains too. I have a couple of their designs. I didn't really buy them too much, the Imaginaire ones, when they were around, but I've since come to get some of those at, I believe it was Viva Las Vegastamps, and maybe somewhere else. I don't know if I bought them off eBay, but I've come to really like those images. Like this Onion Arts one. This this wood block here is it's all been sanded around here, and you know, it's all done by hand on probably a belt sander, and of course this is top part is hand indexed with ink. I really like that type of craftsmanship there. That's a lot of work that goes into that type of rubber stamp. I used to hand index mine, but I switched over to the labels because it was just so labor intensive, and I started getting carpal tunnel one night. It was like, okay, we're going to labels, and I was working on the labels probably the next day. Anyways, okay, now I have to kind of figure out some sort of layout here. Let's go with this one. This one's kind of a funky image. It's a little rock figure. It's by Edward Gorey. It came out of this little set, and it was a foam set, kind of those one of those that you kind of break apart. But I mounted them on wood myself, so I don't know. Someone else knew Edward Gorey, or not the person, but the work, and boy, I looked everywhere to try to find them a place where they can buy these, but it was a funky set. I found them in like a Barnes & Noble or something like that, and I don't know, I guess I should have bought a couple of them, because you just cannot find those now. I couldn't find it anywhere. It's kind of a, you know, a very specific very targeted set. I don't know who they were hoping to, would buy those. I have several Edward Gorey books, but it's kind of a very specific kind of audience that likes his work. And, out of them, you better get someone that's going to like rubber stamps too. Okay, put these two urns on kind of the perimeter of here too. Maybe I'll have like a fire coming out of them, I think, or something like that. Okay, now here's a couple little characters. I don't think I've ever used this one before. This is on 100 proof press. I think I ordered it from them once, a very long time ago. I might have bought it at the stamp convention as well. I used to see them at the Cincinnati convention there. Okay, now this one of the compositional things. This guy's, here we go. This guy's kind of facing this way, so I tend to put inward facing things on the right side, so they're kind of coming in like that. Okay, and I'll just put them right down here. I can just stamp them right over the top of that grass. This sedge filler is, I mean, it has shape to it and mass, but it's light enough to where you can stamp things right over the top of it, and it's really not a problem having that grass texture within the design itself. I mean, you can't even tell, you know what I mean? There was no reason to mask this character off and then stamp the grass behind there. Sedge filler is light enough to where you can just go right over it. That's why I say kind of use light even pressure. Don't squash it down like crazy. Okay, now Viva Las Vegastamps, this little kind of antique doll looking image. We've used this a couple times before. Looks like I've got a little stain on top of here. That's a label, so I don't know if I could polyurethane that without that label kind of peeling, but I'd like to spray that. But this is the company these days, and 100 proof press, that I recommend. Anytime anyone's kind of looking for an image, of something very specific, I often tell them to go look at those two websites, those two companies. 100 proof press has, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 images maybe. They're all kind of that old engraving style. Well, most of them are. And Viva Las Vegastamps just has, they have everything. I mean, they would, I don't know what they do now, but Wayne used to, I think if he just got a specific request, he would just put it on plate at some point in time and make it into a design. I don't know how many requests he had to have had. Maybe if it was just one. And if you can get the artwork from somewhere, you just make it into a stamp. So that being said, they have, I don't know, tens of thousands of images. A lot of them are quotes, but they have a lot of imagery. Okay, this is a fun one. This is Graven Images in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I don't know if they're still around. I loved some of their images. This is 1996, so I don't know if they're still around or not. I haven't checked, but I bought this at Stamp Barbara in Santa Barbara. Okay, because Stamp Barbara had 3 stores, so I never made it over to the Melrose store in Los Angeles. But Costa Mesa, Crystal Core, that's the mall, and Stamp Barbara, the old store, the newer one. Really fantastic stores. If you were a rubber stamper to go to, I didn't make it to them as much as some people did. it was kind of like going to Mecca if you were a rubber stamper. Back in the day, this is before a lot of stores were around too, so it was pretty amazing. You would just basically buy stamps from basically every company that was out there, as far as I know. It's like this is the first time I've used some of these stamps, like these Gorey ones, like that urn. This type of rubber here, I mean, I don't know, you know, these are mass-produced probably in China or something like that. Those ones that are kind of the foam tear-apart ones, especially if it was in a place like Barnes & Noble or a bookstore like that. So the rubber isn't quite 100% red rubber that I prefer. So sometimes you have to, it doesn't take the ink as well as 100% rubber, so, red rubber, so yeah, I'm just hoping it kind of stamps it a little bit better than that urn did. That urn was a little bit light. It's because it kind of absorbs a little bit of ink when you're inking them up. Some rubber is kind of a fusion of, that was perfect, kind of a fusion of, I think, clay and rubber. And that's because, you know, those ones that are little snap-apart ones, they're more seen as like a little novelty thing, like a toy or something like that, where, I don't know, maybe they don't expect people to, you know, buy a stamp and to have it for 20 years or something like that. I don't know when that Edward Gorey one came out, though, but it's been really quite some time since it's been out. Okay, now let me see if I can lay down some imagery behind this collection of... I mean, it's really scattered. I'll have to see if I can kind of bring a semblance of, I don't know, unity, unification, whatever you want to call it, to this collection of images, and to bring it into one kind of a little bit more of a cohesive composition, you know, with a little bit of structure to it. I mean, it's okay now. This is, you know, a lot of people used to stamp this way back in the old days, you know, as we say. It's always kind of fun talking to people that have been around stamping for, you know, 20 or 30 years, because just kind of, we've really seen the evolution of the medium, you know, for a very long time. And I certainly remember the days when there weren't a lot of accessories out, or even, you know, what I'm using here, dye-based inks, raised dye-based ink pads. Alright, I'm going to try to... What I've done is I've kind of removed a lot of the ink off of this tree, because I want it to stamp off very lightly, and I want it to look like there's, yeah, like there, it's kind of in the mist, like back there, so we have kind of a more crisp, darker impression of the objects that are in the foreground. And okay, I'm gonna go for it. I'm going to try to go for another impression, and it should be so dry that I think I can go right over the top of these objects here. We'll see. I hope it's not going to obscure it. Yeah, it looks fine. So that's kind of the third impression right there. Very, very kind of light and obscure. And light enough to where that stone kind of figure is still visible somewhat, I guess, you know. Okay, so I've inked it off, or stamped it off, with a pretty good impression of it right here. Lightening it up from here. Lightening meaning drying it up. Okay, from down here, taking a pretty good amount, and then as I move up, I'm kind of removing a little bit less, so I'm kind of pressing a little bit lighter with my thumb, because I do want these ones to be, you know, pretty light. We have a lot of objects here in the foreground. This is one of those things that you can do where You know, so you don't have to mask anything out. You can kind of use value to, I don't know, control the, what's visible and whatnot. Not that I'm against masking, but, it certainly takes more work. Okay. I'll tell you what, I'm going to mask this off so it looks like this tree is a little bit behind, maybe, the hill. That's what I'm hoping it'll appear as though it is, and it should. You don't always have to have the trunks, you know, showing. Okay. Something like that. Okay, we need something out here, don't we? I'm tempted to go for another impression, but, you know, for that third impression, but I don't think I'm going to do that. It doesn't really take long to ink it up and, you know, stamp it off and wipe it off like this. Okay, let's mask this off a little bit, and we'll go about like... I can see where that bat is. I'll kind of blot off some of that tree where I think it's going to overlap that bat. The bat's been invited to the midnight rendezvous on Halloween night. A little bit darker than I wanted. That bat, it's light enough, I guess. It'll be one of our less significant players in our compositional arrangement. Okay, let's take a lot of this ink off. Okay, I've really stamped that one out pretty thoroughly. Okay, and let's go for something like something like this. Okay, stamped right over the urn. But the yarn is dark enough to where it still holds up, I think. And how about we do the same thing over here? Do people still refer to kind of breathing on your stamp as huffing? That's what they used to call it. Okay, so we have our compositional arrangement here. Yeah, pretty fun. Okay. Now we'll see if we can kind of bring this together. I might stamp some other things in here in addition to this, but let's see what we can do about kind of making this into a, you know, that cohesive kind of a whole here. All right. Ew, look at this. I haven't used this for, I don't know, a couple weeks now. It still has a lot of ink in it. That blue. Comes to show you sometimes, you know. So, someone told me they, I think it was on Facebook, right? They popped open some pads that they hadn't opened up in like 20 years, and some of them were still nice and juicy. Or I don't know about nice and juicy, but still fairly moist. And they were asking about pads and brands, and my suggestion was that if some of those pads are still fine, well then, you know, just use those or just reconstitute them a little bit with some water. I mean, these are water-based inks, right? Dye-based inks. Just add a little bit of water to them and, you know, kind of reinvigorate them. You don't have to add anything special because the binders that are in them, too, are often water-soluble as well. So you can reinvigorate them with kind of a refresher liquids, but all it is, you know, it's usually just the binder, you know, without the pigment in it. So, but my suggestion, you know, if you just kind of put a few drops of water on there. That's if you haven't used them, okay? Now, if you've used your pads and they're kind of dry, then they're going to be, you know, missing a lot of the pigment into there. So if you add water to it, they're going to have a much, you know, duller look. But if you're fine with them, then that's fine. You know, you just remember that, you know, that it's going to be a much more pale and light version of that original color. But like I said, if you haven't used it though, you can just kind of revive them to their original kind of intensity, brightness, you know. All right, now this is just going to be a monochromatic, so I'm using London Fog here. It's a Memento gray color. And it's fairly light. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm bringing in my color into this scene right now, and I'm kind of leaving some areas kind of the white of the paper. I don't want to ink in the whole thing. You want to leave some light here and there for variation. Okay, now I'm going to kind of cap off the top of my composition with some tone. Maybe I'll kind of retain somewhat of a horizon glow back here. That'll be good for some pigment ink, you know, to kind of give the scene a little bit of a foggy feel, you know. I was always kind of into those kind of funkier images. They kind of caught my eye. I always, you know, when you see some different types of imagery out there, I don't know, kind of wheel the gears, you know, go in motion about how to use them. Sometimes you're just kind of attracted to certain types of imagery. The Edward Gorey ones. He was a pen and ink artist, and you know, black and white mainly, and I know that's something that certainly resonates with me as a pen and ink artist as well. You know, or a lover of black and white imagery, like high contrast and a lot of texture, and he had kind of interesting kind of imagery that he drew. Some of you might know him for the Mystery Theater on PBS. Kind of that intro. I never watched Mystery Theater, but I always enjoyed watching that intro. Okay. Now, sometimes what you have to do with certain types of certain values of ink is you have to kind of not only color something, you know, a lot of times when we're doing things like outlined images, we're used to coloring in something, and as soon as we get the full amount of, you know, coverage from side to side, that's it. But in this kind of layering of tone, not only are you coloring something, but you're kind of saturating it a little bit more, and sometimes adding more ink and kind of achieving somewhat of a super saturation of ink on a given piece of paper will darken it, and you'll get closer to the full value of that given color. So this London Fog goes on pretty light, but then when I really layer it on the cardstock here, it achieves a deeper value, a darker value. So that's why I keep going over it quite a bit. Okay, all right. getting to that darker tone. It's starting to kind of achieve somewhat of a little more of a cohesive feel. You know, it's still very light. I'll need to move all the way into that black, though. All right, let's go to the Marvy Gray. The Marvy Gray is a little bit darker than the Memento London Fog. Marvy is, this gray is more of a, maybe a 50% gray. I would say that London Fog is more like a 30, 25, 30%. And I don't know, sometimes that London Fog, it's a fairly neutral gray, but I don't know. It might have a tinge of temperature in it, I'm not sure. The Marvy Gray is more of just a straight neutral gray. I'm wondering if I need to re-ink it, because it seems to be very, very light. I don't know. I'll test it later. Yeah, I mean, it's darker. I can tell now. I had a lot of the London Fog still in this pad, so I don't think I was getting a full saturation of that gray. Or application. Saturation and thus application of gray. Alright, now I'd like to add a little bit of shadows at the base of my characters here, and like this head. It kind of anchors them into the scene. If you don't do that with certain objects, they look like they're floating in space, so if you can just kind of anchor them down a little bit. And I'll do that with some pens as well. I have a lot of pens to work with now. If you watched a recent video, I picked up a pack of 88 alcohol markers at a very reasonable rate. It was $40. But it has a lot of gray tones in it, you know. It's the type of thing I wouldn't want to have all the gray tones that I have if the pens were $5 a pen. I wouldn't buy as many of certain colors, but, yeah, well, I don't know, less than 50 cents a pen. Can't be beat. But so anyway, see that little anchoring kind of shadow at the base of these characters? It kind of puts them into the scene, I would say. A little bit more. I mean, I'll need to, like I said, the black will really serve as an anchoring value. But I keep turning this upside down because it's just easier for me to get. I can see the, you know, where this little object is, and I can just see. I can tap this like this, but if it's like this, you know, it's not quite. You know, this tool's in my way, so kind of always turn your card in a way that's going to be the most, I don't know, functional for that mark that you're making, okay? Okay, even anchoring down the little snail. The snail's been invited to the party, to the gathering, whatever. Okay, alright. Let's go back to the black now. Kind of test every time you move into a different color, ink up and kind of, you know, test it in a smaller area, you know, to get a good feel for what that color application is going to be like. For example, I mean, if I was using a super juicy pad right here, and it depends how much ink I laid down before it, you know, my application kind of movement and, I don't know, I guess kind of rhythm would be different, you know. If it's super juicy, I might want to kind of stay on the edge a little bit longer before I kind of take it into some of the lighter areas, just because it's going to be so much darker on there. So Nice and kind of an incremental process. Sometimes I over ink my pads, you know, I don't know. I think they're a little bit drier than they are, and I'll put too much ink on there, so I don't know, just adjust accordingly. Okay, so this is kind of capping off the top of it. Now it's really kind of bringing, you know, the viewer's attention down this way. If you kind of cap it off right up there, like so, it's doing that kind of concept of a vignette, you know. What that does, it kind of contains and frames your scene, and in a scene like this with, you know, so many different kind of players, you know, objects, you know, within the scene. You can see them as kind of like actors or something. It is important, I believe, to kind of contain them, you know, with a strong framing device. And a vignette serves that purpose very well. And I mean, you know, for a scene like this, you know, with this type of content, you know, it certainly seems to be in theme with that type of imagery. Now, if you notice, kind of I'm staying in one area. Here's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid kind of thinking about a vignette, so you kind of go like this. Ding, 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 because then you'll get all these shapes like this, okay? So, that's what everyone wants to do, you know, but it's not that. It's kind of just staying in an area, okay? This, and working a small area, okay, like a corner like this, and I'm kind of working my way in. And that's how I get this transitions, you know, going from dark to light, because I'm working the wet to dry, outside to in, wet to dry, wet to dry, wet to dry, okay? Outside to inside, outside to inside. So the outsides always get a, you know, stronger saturation of that ink. What people want to do though is this, and then they say, I'm getting oval shapes everywhere. And that's always what is happening. They're trying to do it, you know, like this, which is kind of, you know, a very difficult way to work if you're trying to go for this kind of transition of tones. You always just kind of want to work an area. And then when you're done with it, you're done. Okay, see that little anchoring point of that shadow down there? Stronger vignette, corners right here. Let's go down to this one. This is Felix the cat, by the way. It's like a Felix the cat wind-up cat. Or where are you going to find an image like that, you know? I guess at 100 Proof Press is where you find it. I haven't seen a Felix the cat cartoon in, I don't know, 40 years maybe? I'll have to see. They're probably on YouTube, but I haven't checked. I used to watch them all the time as a kid. Okay, kind of creating a little bit of a horizon here. See, what I do is I have this tool kind of at an angle, so I'm going like that, as opposed to, you don't always have to use the whole thing like that. Okay. create a little bit of a stronger horizon. And we'll put a little variation in this hillside grass texture as well. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Okay, so there's our little characters. They'll have their little shadows underneath them, even the trees do, and this little snail. Let me see, let me create a little bit more of a shadow with it. Is it a he or a she snail? I have no idea. I don't know, can people tell that? Okay, I think down by the... I didn't add the black around these characters yet. That whole head is, I don't know, not quite a Sleepy Hollow type of thing, but I don't know, it kind of harkens back to that kind of idea. Okay. Sure were some fun companies out there in terms of the types of imagery they had. Some Graven images. I think I bought 2 or 3 of their images one time at Stampa Barbara. Alright. Well, this is what I call tipping the edges. Kind of putting a really strong kind of edge to them. Corner, I guess. To really kind of strengthen my kind of vignette structure to the scene. And the darker you kind of make some area of your scene, the lighter areas are going to seem by contrast. So whenever we're working with light in a scene, I mean, we have reflected light, you know, but the depiction of light in a scene is a product of contrast. So if you want to make something look lighter or look as though it might be a light source, what you have to do is you have to kind of make the areas around it darker or near it. Okay. I think I need to re-ink my black, but it's kind of working fairly well. I can just tap right into it and just go, you know, kind of if your pads are a little bit drier. Sometimes it serves its purpose well. Alright. This area in here could be, yeah, maybe I could stand to be a little bit darker, you know, without such a bright tinge to it. Maybe I'll darken the background a little bit, which is with like a 5% gray, you know, just so that glow isn't so intense or light. Make it look a little more dreary, maybe. There's a challenge on the Stampscapes 2 Yahoo group. It was Children at Play was a recent theme. I think I'm going to put this one in that album. Might not be exactly the interpretation that was thought of, but I don't know, these are like little, I see these like as little toys, like they're kids, you know, kind of coming out to play. Yeah, it could certainly be part of the fall theme too. I think they're thinking about more like fall leaves and fall colors, but I don't know, why not, you know? Halloween's in fall. Okay, torn paper towel technique, right? Just to give some variation within our meadow. It's all okay. I mean, the Sedge filler is designed, you know, to give us some texture, but you can kind of enhance that texturing with some of this torn paper towel type of thing. A lot of people do this for, you know, to represent mountains or something like that in the distance. I like to do it anywhere where there's texture, though. Anywhere where there can be layered texture, I guess, to be more specific. I like to have a kind of jagged edge to my paper towel as well. You don't want to have a kind of just a straight line, and you don't have to go all the way across it like that. You can kind of do it here and there. See that? And it gives you that nice, you know, kind of varied line, which you would see, you know, if you're looking at any type of textured area, you know, like in a meadow or something like that. The art of paper towel tearing, huh? I think one time when I was doing a demonstration at a convention or something like that, I was doing this technique, and I just said, just as a joke, I said, yeah, I'll be teaching, you know, a class in paper towel tearing at, you know, at noon or something like that. And people thought, oh, okay. I had to tell him, hey, I'm just joking. But, kind of funny. That being said, sometimes paper towels do have a little bit of a grain to them. You know, if you tear them one way, it tears really kind of very straight. And if you tear it the other way, it kind of gives you more of that jagged, you know, kind of uneven look. You want that jagged kind of tear to it. Anyways, this is coming around very nicely in the darker areas. It's very effective. You can see this paper towel, how kind of jagged it is. You can see how perfect that'll be. Kind of right in this area. See that right there? I mean, it looks okay, but I mean, it could stand to use a lot more texture in that area. You know, it's just, and it's just with this very simple little technique. Now see, what I'm doing is I'm stamping mostly on this paper towel here. I'm just giving the edge, and then I'm kind of working it up like that, okay? So right next to the towel, I want it a little bit darker, and then as I move up, it becomes a little bit lighter, okay? So it becomes like that, okay? And you just kind of shift it around here and there, and bring in a little bit of that texture wherever you want it to go. There we go. How about a rounder trace back up in here? Kind of giving a nice character. You can kind of, you know, we have all kinds of different types of stamps and things, but when you do this type of thing to a given area, I mean, you're kind of creating, I'm making the grassy area into a pretty vital character in itself. I mean, it has kind of more personality to it, like this. So it becomes, and just instead of it just becoming some kind of foundation or setting that's, you know, somewhat obscure, I mean, that foundation now has a certain type of flair to it, and like I said, personality, I guess you can say. It's more of a, you know, I wouldn't say a vital component, but it just has a stronger role to play, you know, when you give it, you know, kind of a stronger texture and certainly more variation. And when you give it something more variation, potentially you can create kind of a stronger visual. That way, there's a richness to the surface, in other words. Try to anchor the urn into the scene a little bit more. Putting this paper towel right around the base of it, and darkening in the area right to each side of it. Okay. Alright, it almost looks like clouds, so you can do the same type of thing. If you have like a sky or something like that, you can do it in clouds and it looks really good. Alright, I think we're really getting there as far as our foundation here. I think, you know, things are on a kind of in a nice cohesive way. Yeah, looks like a nice gathering of old friends, maybe. Kind of young old friends. They're immortals, you know. They gather every Halloween night, maybe. Maybe this is their group picture or something like that. Okay, now, I was mentioning some pens, and I have this gigantic, let me see if I can show you there, this gigantic set of inexpensive pens, okay? But we can see here's all kinds of variations of gray. Warm grays, cool grays, in various values. This one's a really pale warm gray. Here's a very dark warm gray, relatively speaking. All right. So many colors I probably wouldn't get, like I said, if they were quite pricey, but at that price point, I like that price point very much, of like 50 cents. But let's see, let's do a little bit of testing here. That's a little bit warmer gray than I want right now. I think I want more of a neutral gray. Okay, we have warm grays and cool grays. Let's go with the cool gray. Let me see if the cool grays. All right, that's what I was thinking. The cool gray is really more of a neutral gray, at least in this. I don't know what that is. It's like a 10%. It's barely visible. But I'm going to color in some of these objects a little bit more. Now this is definitely not a big commitment to this value, to the hue. I mean, it's very, very light. And one of the things about objects, let's say something represents white, okay? Oftentimes I see people where they have something that's, it might be white in hue, okay? But when you put it into a setting like this one, or really any type of setting, white, like this piece of paper, you know, the shadows becomes dark, right? So oftentimes I see people when they have like a white object within the scene, they don't color it in, but the rest of the scene is toned. But I just think that if they kind of render things a little bit more and add a few subtle shadows or something like that to those objects, it would look like it kind of belongs in the scene a little bit more. It fits a little bit more, like these bones right here. Okay, let's do the snail shell. Now, where do you color? You know, where do you color something? Well, I just hit the shadows. See, there's shadows already in the object itself, and all you have to do is kind of reiterate that. Use your objects as cues. Take your cues from the objects themselves. Okay, that was a very light and value cool gray. Let's see, the next cool gray looks to be this one. This is a CGO 0.5. This is CG1, so I don't think there was like a 7.5. There might have been. Okay, let's see, testing. Okay, it's just, boy, it's fantastic. I mean, it's just a little bit darker, so I can kind of hit some of those areas a little bit more if I want there to be a little bit more of a distinction in the shadows being, cast. Kind of going in this character right here. I can barely see it change, but I'm sure there is. But it's nice, though, because I like my changes to come very gradually, and when they do that, I have a lot more control over them than if I'm hitting at something, if I went from like that, 10% gray to a 40% gray or something like this. This is just a jump of like, I don't know, maybe 10% or something. I don't know what the theory is in terms of you know, the jumps that they've taken, but they're nice and gradual. Okay, let's see. That was a cool gray. All right, that was a cool gray 1. Now this one looks like it's a bit of a jump, so this one's a cool gray 5. There might be a cool gray something else here. I didn't notice. Here's a 7. Okay, there's a cool gray 3. All right. Let's use the 3. Let's not use the bullet tip, though. Okay. Very, very subtle. Again. Okay, I can see it a little bit more, but kind of adding it in over the top of these other grays, you know, the jump is very gradual, like I said. So it's very easy to work with. Kind of adding it into the shadows. Say that you can't use alcohol pens on glossy cardstock, but the way I use it, you certainly can. It's just, you know, color in a little area or object. I'm not doing vast areas of blended tones or anything like that, you know, so I couldn't answer to that. But when I'm doing like really specifics and just going for specifics within my objects, they certainly work fine, and they're really the best for that because they're not blending my dye-based ink work out. You know, it fits right in. Okay, let me add a little bit of more shading, you know, at the base of my characters here. I can get very specific with that. You know, with this little tip here, instead of using that sponge. Kind of just anchors my little characters down a little bit more. You can see on this skeleton there, I can put a little bit more shading on its forehead and in some of the bones, the spinal column maybe. Kind of hitting the spinal column a little bit more so that maybe the rib cage would show up a little bit more. Okay. Alright, where were we? Cool gray 5. I just noticed there's that tip thing, fine tip, broad tip. I don't think I even noticed that. I just got these pens fairly recently. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Although, I don't know, in terms of my progression. The guy looks like a little Stonehenge figure or something. A little doll here coming out, greeting her friends. Kind of coloring around this guy's eyes to make his eyes stand out a little bit more. Maybe I'll use a white gel pen to kind of bring that out. Little wrinkles on the forehead, kind of accentuating that. Coloring in some areas within the ears, like so. Felix. Our Urns. And our Snail. I'm kind of tempted to give this scene a little bit of temperature, but I'm not sure if I want to do that. Temperature meaning, you know, a slight tinge of blue or something like that. Or warmth, I could do that too, because it's, you know, the colors on here are fairly neutral right now, or they are neutral, so I could take it either way. I could put a little warmth in here with some color if I want to. I'm not sure though. I do kind of like the grayscale a lot. And I do plan on adding some pigment ink in here to kind of give it a little bit more atmosphere, so that'll provide you know, a lot of the character of the piece as well, so maybe I don't need to add something like in there in terms of color. Although I don't think it would look bad or anything, but I don't know, considering it still. Alright, there's a cool gray 7. Alright, I guess there were 5 cool grays, okay. Alright. Pretty dark, okay. These pens are so juicy, I've never used them before. Some of these colors. Okay. You know, let me try to bring a little bit of warmth into a couple of these characters, I think. Let me add a little bit of warmth to this little skeleton. Yeah, this is just the warm gray 0.5. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's very subtle. I doubt if you can tell at all on the camera. It's just a tiny tinge of warmth. It's kind of like a, no, it's almost like a, I don't know, like a 2% orange or something like that. Very, very subtle. Yeah, maybe you can tell a little bit. I don't know. Alright, let's try the 1. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It's very, very subtle. Sometimes, I don't know, it creates a little bit of differentiation between the objects and maybe the surrounding area, which could be good. You know, a lot of times I like continuity and similarity between, you know, the objects and the surrounding areas, but I don't know, it's, you know, subtle enough to where, you know, kind of that barely shows. You can tell a tiny tinge in there of a change of hue or variation of hue. Okay, let's do something where we can create a nice atmospheric mist and setting for them. You want a nice soft cotton swab. Kind of unravel a little bit. The softer it is, the softer your pigment ink will apply. Make sense? Alright. This, I think this pad is my really, is that pad my, okay, this one's my really wet, dry one. This one's really wet one, okay? I'll use both, okay? Now this one you can see my pad itself, it's so, let me see if I can get this camera to focus. it's very compressed. You can see where it's actually been dented in. It's because I tap in, you know, like this into it, and I tap in hard because there's barely any ink in there at this point in time. It's a very old pad, okay, so don't press in like this if you're using, you know, your pad out there. I doubt if anyone has as dry a pad as mine. If your pad was as dry as mine, you probably tossed it out because you're inking things up with it. But I'm using it for my fog application, okay? So, if you have a really juicy one like this one is, I think I re-inked this one. It's all, you know, sloppy wet. Barely ink tap into it, okay? Now, what you want to do is you want to remove a lot of this ink. Let me zoom in here on my blotter paper, and I'm going to... See, I don't want that much ink on there where I go like that, and it leaves, you know, strong imprint, okay? I want it to where there's barely any ink on here, so that when I start applying it into the scene like this, you know, it's applying a very, very light application of it, okay? Now, my area down here is very light. If it's dark, then this mark is going to show up much more distinctly, okay? But let me show you where I like to add this, okay? This is a really easy process if you just kind of do it this way. If you've gone too dark, it doesn't make sense because, you know, there's not going to be any light reflecting off mist there. So you have to have some areas that are light. And where this fog really stands out is where you have light meet dark, okay? So let's see. Let's try to zoom in here. Okay. See the legs of that little stone character back there? Light meets dark right there. So that's going to be a very effective place for me to add this, okay? I'm just very lightly dabbing it. If you've added too much, which will happen, I dab too much all the time. You just kind of dab it away with your finger and remove it, okay? Now most people are going to start this approach with way too much ink on their tip right here, okay? You're going to want to really remove off quite a bit. You want it to where, when you add it, like after one tap, you can't see anything. And it's only through consecutive taps, 10 maybe, where it just kind of starts to come into focus. You can kind of see your application, okay? A lot of people don't have patience for it, so they kind of rush it, and it's a blob of paint everywhere. And, you know, they have to kind of remove it. It's just easier if you just kind of have a very minimal amount on here, where you can just kind of build it up and have a lot of control over it. So see that? Now it's kind of obscure, and little characters standing in fog, so let's kind of put a little bit more fog at the base, okay? And then as I transition up, I have less of it, so I'm adding more down at the base, and as I move up, there's less and less, okay? Okay, now I'm not using a brilliance white. You can use pretty much, I'm going to say every white, except for brilliance, doing this. Now you can use brilliance in there, but it's hard to manipulate brilliance, because brilliance dries on glossy paper very quickly, or matte paper, or whatever. It just dries on paper very quickly. That's what it's kind of been designed to do. So there's certain applications for that, but if you want to be able to manipulate something, you can't have something drying and setting so fast. It's really hard to remove. But this one, you see that, like that right there, it comes right off. It'll even come right off, even after it dries. That's the beauty of it. There's so much control over it. It's the easiest and most forgiving medium, but this is what people do. They ink it up, you know, they ink up their thing, and it's sloppy wet, and then they go like that. Okay, it's even more ink than that, okay? And there's just too much. Okay, move that out. Start all over, okay? Now remember, I mean, my pad is very, very dry, so even, you know, when I really tried to make an example of what I was talking about right there. I didn't. It probably inked up, 1/10 of the ink that most people's pigment ink pads are. I say that because all of my other white pads are very juicy. I just don't use them that much. Even when they're very old, they have a lot of ink in them. Okay, so this is where light meets dark, so I'm kind of bringing a little bit over the top of it like that. See how it kind of obscures those meeting points between, the negative space and the object, okay? And don't take it in. Don't put it everywhere. Like, it's supposed to be kind of transitioning from ink, pigment ink up like that. I mean, now see, here's this lighter area right here. Look what happens when I kind of obscure some of those trees. But it has to be a fairly light, okay? And see, I'm barely applying any. But now look at that tree right there. Doesn't it look kind of interesting? If I want to put a little bit in here, like some light is coming from in between the trees, just that little tiny amount. It was quite a few taps, but I wasn't applying very much ink. So you do that, and the trees kind of take on kind of a different look. See this area back in the distance, where it was very light. I can kind of obscure some of it a little bit more, and it just seems to kind of blend into the background a little bit more, and you're kind of describing light when you do something like this. You're saying that that object is far off, far enough back in the distance that light, when, let's say we're in this setting right here, when light goes into the distance and it's coming back, it's farther back, so it's going through more of this moisture in the air that's illuminated, and that object is kind of being broken up. The visual of that image is being broken up with all this particles of little moisture in the air. So it's light hitting something, coming through the air and all that fog and back to our eye. And the more fog that's in between you and that object, more moisture in the air, breaking that light apart, it becomes a little bit more obscure. Now see that, what that did back there? Doesn't that kind of give it some nice atmosphere? Let's say right next to this head right here. See right in here? I've left some of the white of the paper, so I can kind of apply some white of this pigment ink. See over here, it wouldn't make sense, right? Because it isn't light over there. So it's kind of the meeting points of where light meets dark. Or light meets something, it could be light, meeting, something very light in value, but it's just darker than, white itself. So, like this area right here, this isn't really light meets dark, but it is darker than this, right? So you kind of put this in here, and it has obscured it, and I don't know, I think it makes it look really cool. Alright, now see this little figure down here? I can put this little figure in a little bit of fog. It's dark down here, but I can do a little bit of that, I think, and I don't think it'll look kind of out of place. And this pigment ink, I'm telling you, if you can kind of get the feel of this, application of this, it will, what it does, this is what it does for me. It can save a lot of my scenes where I don't think, I like to experiment all the time, but sometimes it's like you're kind of riding the edge, a lot of times, if something's going to look okay or not, But this pigment ink, being able to apply light into dark like that, it can make something that doesn't look so great look pretty good, and it can make something that looks pretty good much nicer, Like this right back in here, I think that looks pretty good, but you add this, and you kind of create this. I guess the objects look like, it looks like it's glowing to me now, you know, where it looked fine before, but you add this element in here, and you've created this glowing light type of look because it's a softer look. So it looks like it's glowing back there to me now. See that? I think that looks really fun. That makes for a nice kind of atmospheric setting. Let me put some fog down at the base of our little party host here. Let's put his legs, you know, standing in kind of a bank of fog. Now this character right here is very distinct, right? It's very sharp and in focus. It kind of stands out, right? I mean, I have this shadow down here where I try to blend him into the surrounding, but let's blend him in a little bit more. See, I'm putting something in here, so we've added this element in here, so it's kind of, it's setting him into the scene, because now it's kind of we've put this fog in front of him, or a little bit. I don't want to obscure him completely. Some people just do the whole thing everywhere. But I think it's best if you kind of just create a little bit of a, what would be the word? It's I'm trying to think of the word. It's where you have something in the, you know, you I'll think of it in a bit. It's where you have something and then you don't, okay? You kind of disperse it selectively. Oscillation, that's what the word I'm trying to think of. You oscillate it. You have, you know, some application of it here and there, because you want some areas to become, you know, crisp too, okay? And I think that makes it look a little bit more effective. It changes the kind of the tapestry of the thing, having, you know, kind of this oscillation of sharp and soft, okay? Okay, now let's look at around these eyes right here. I want those eyes to be kind of glowing, so I'm going to kind of add this in here like this. And now we've kind of created a glow coming out of the character's eyes. This is what I do around some of my stars if I have a nighttime type of scene. Let's have a little bit of this coming out of his mouth too, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe that was too much. Okay. Anyway, see, it's kind of, his eyes are kind of glowing now. Do I want some around the snail? Maybe a little bit. Okay. Let's kind of put this little doll into a little bit of fog. Really kind of sets it into the scene, doesn't it? A little bit more. Okay, Felix. Felix is kind of standing in the darkness. I don't want to do anything to that. Alright, our gathering of friends on a nice foggy atmospheric night, just like they like it. Alright, so that's the fog. Now, Versafine. Who doesn't love Versafine? Very black. Ink. It's a instant dry pigment ink. It's instant dry if you really stamp it onto a matte paper, but on glossy paper it takes a little bit of time to dry. But let's see how it'll look here. I'm going to add my final touches onto the scene. And the grassy sedge filler stamp represents grass, right? So let's add a little bit more kind of a field of view by adding some closer grass to us. Alright, so right now, I mean, these characters right here are our foreground, right? And we'll keep them that way somewhat, but let's add in a little bit more foreground. Okay. Okay, see that right there? This is without it. It kind of gives it a little bit more body, doesn't it? Light and even impressions again. Kind of going back to the sedge filler idea. Don't do this, you know, don't squash it on there, otherwise the tips of your reeds will become very squashed. Changing the height periodically and changing the angle. I don't want it to look as though this is kind of a picket fence or something. There we go. And I'll tell you what, I think I want to have some kind of overhang in here too, maybe some kind of branch or something. In the left and right corner. Okay, let me find a stamp. I think I'm going to go for Spooky Branch. Okay, this is the Spooky Branch stamp. It's a very large stamp, but I'm just going to be using certain portions of it on the left and right side. And what this is doing is it's kind of creating somewhat of a framing device, just as the bottom is too. We have these little kind of structures right here kind of coming in from the top, like that. See how much darker they are from the background too? So they do stand out to me. But see, these things are kind of pointing inwards, and these ones are pointing kind of downward too, so in towards the composition. So just like they kind of reinforce this idea of the framework, you know, that was created by the vignette. So you add these objects around, and plus what you're doing is you're creating space as well, you know, by having something close and or closer, in addition to farther away, near and far. And these impressions here too look very crisp. So you have this aspect of sharp and soft, especially with that pigment ink laid down there. Things, you know, take on kind of a softer feel, or you've added a softer element into the scene, so it's kind of nice. You're kind of playing a lot of contrast, near and far, dark against light, sharp against soft, and that's what that type of thing can do. That type of element in that color, or in that value, I should say, more specifically. All right, there's our little gathering of friends. On a moonlit night. Oh. There's always those other things that we can do to something like this. I almost forgot. I remembered earlier, but then I forgot again. Let's go add a little element of, you know how I was saying sharp and soft. This is my white pink. I need to figure out which one of these is empty and whatnot. Okay, this is a Uniball Signo 1.0. Just use any type of white pink pen that's working for you. Alright, let me get at this skeleton. I'm going to just... This is not the most... Well, none of this stamping that I ever do is really dynamic video watching material, but this is just little subtle little details. Okay, I'm just going in. Where do you add this? Well, I'm looking for highlights, in the image itself, and kind of just adding this in there. I think it can give, a real kind of three-dimensional feel to something by having these highlights on objects. Okay, now I'm not gonna highlight something that's in an area that's too dark, because chances are you wouldn't see a highlight, unless there's been some kind of illumination there. But in like this little skeleton, let me see if I can bring it up closer, we can see. And I feel that these little details, especially on such a key figure like this, aren't lost, okay, to add little things like that, okay, those highlights, because, it's kind of, one of the main focal points of the scene. Okay, let's take a look at this guy down here. Now there are some of those areas where, that sedge filler was showing through, because I just stamped him right over the sedge filler. So, I can kind of lighten up some of those areas like this, and those teeth maybe, and make them stand out a little bit more. With something like white pen, gel pen. Now I'd rather just do that, quick little few dots in there than to have had to cut out a whole mask and the mask around him, It was just easier just to do it this way. Felix, why not? I'll put a thing on. I can add his little whiskers in there if I want to. I'm not, but I could. Alright, so now see here, it's this little doll here. See how it has that little light area? I can just kind of reiterate that a little bit, like that. Put a few little highlights on her. I think it's a she. Something like that. I mean, we're talking about subtleties here. Okay, now this, the eyes here. Now this little figure here, I don't know, whatever it is, like a lava entity or something like that. I can just kind of fill in there and reclaim kind of the lighter lightness that it probably should have been, but I have the sedge filler showing through because I just stamped it right over the top. But I just go in here and just reclaim that with some white gel. I always think of this white gel more like paint. And maybe in the teeth, I think I'm going to add this little white. Like there's kind of this interior glow to this figure. See that right there? That's eyes kind of stand out a little bit more. And maybe on this snail shell. And a few little dots of highlights on it. A little texture and maybe on the head. Like so. This right here, add a few little highlights like that. Alright, so we have this little areas down here in the grass. I can kind of add some highlights on the top sides of kind of where that mask was, and maybe that'll add a little bit of atmosphere and lighting, texture. It's nothing real, it doesn't stand out, you know, really distinctly, but when you do this consistently over the whole area, the whole thing will kind of, you know, come to life a little bit. And just like the pigment ink, if you add it down somewhere and you don't like it, you just kind of buff it right out and it's gone. It's one of the most forgiving techniques you can possibly do. When you can remove something as easy as that, you know, it's very convenient and very forgiving. Okay. Sometimes when we're just kind of starting to do something like this, sometimes, you know, the tendency is to add a little bit too much. So it's kind of nice to be able to just go and kind of take a, you know, paper towel or something like that, and you can buff it out. I mean, I just removed it with my finger right there, but it, you know, if you're doing something like this, it is kind of a good idea to add a few little dots and kind of hold your scene at arm's distance and see how it looks. Because sometimes you can add some of these down and it really stands out, especially if you've added them down in an area that's very dark, you know, so there's a lot of contrast between that mark and the background. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of adding in those areas where, again, light meets dark, and I'm adding it on that lighter side. Kind of right around the edge of where light meets dark. Okay? If you want to know kind of the concept of that, what I'm doing, let's take a look at this pen right here. Okay. Well, this pen right, let me see if I can get it to focus on this pen. Okay, I might be zoomed in a little bit too much. Okay, so we have this pen right here. You can see this line right down here, right? Well, that plastic is the same color, but when we add this glare in here, that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of adding little highlights like that. And this, you know, that silver there is being reflective of, you know, the light that's coming from above. Even on this plastic right here, see, there's that highlight right there. This pen that I'm carrying right here, or even one of my fingers. If I go like this, right, you can see the kind of highlights on my knuckles, okay? Or my fingernail, right? So that's what you're just kind of doing. You're just kind of adding in those little things. Here's a, you know, pad here. It's lighter right here, right, where you can see a little bit of those highlights. So you can see that highlights, you know, those types of reflected little, you know, elements of specular light or reflected light are really, you know, they're everywhere around us. So when you kind of add that back into something like this, it can add a nice little element. And okay, now this is kind of a little magical looking scene. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these little dots, okay, these little glowing little, I don't know what they are, fairies, or I don't know, maybe they're lightning bugs. I don't really see them as that. I don't know. It's just kind of those little magical little entities. Okay. I didn't think about this until I just I remembered to add in some of the gel pen marks. I wasn't thinking about this earlier, but I think this is going to add a nice kind of texture. Alright, now I'm going to make all these old dots glow too. I'll add some of these, I'll make them a little bit bigger, like they're some closer to us. I'll cluster some maybe here and there. Some back in the trees. Okay. I love adding these little things, like little elements. I don't do little glowing spheres of light all the time, but I do love adding these little types of finishing touches or textures, you know. A lot. I don't know. It's just that little element that can kind of bring something to life, you know. Even more so than kind of as it existed before. You can even make it snowing or something like that, but these ones will just be these little glowing little spheres. Let's see if we can, let's see what they look like. Okay, coming in with my pigment, this is what my little cotton swab, it's almost becoming too frayed. Let's see if I can get a clean kind of circular application of that on that. Oop, I used my wet pigment ink. Okay, I'm gonna have to remove a lot of this pigment ink. Okay. See that right there? It's kind of glowing, that little ball. Or that little sphere. Alright, I need a new cotton swab. This one's like completely uneven. Alright, let's see. So kind of loosen it up a little bit. Use a cotton one too. Don't use one of those acrylic ones that are really super tightly bound, like at the like a 99-cent store or something. You want it soft, you know, you want a real soft applicator so that it goes on soft. Okay. It's like little glowing little spheres coming in. It almost looks like they're coming in this way too. I don't know why. I think it looks like that. There's a little bit of a movement to it. Like there's a kind of a floating type of element now to the scene. I think it's a little bit more magical, having these little critters in there like that. I don't know if anyone saw the movie Maleficent, but there's a lot of these little elements like this floating around in that, in her domain. Maybe I'll leave some just sharp, you know, and not have them all glowing. Yeah, just for that variation. A little bit more lively, I would say, huh? Some of you might be thinking, I liked it better before. And that's good. Too. I liked it before too. I don't know if I liked it. I think I like this one better. I like these little things. I think it's a friendlier, more inviting look, I think. Which is what I kind of wanted to go for. I don't want it to look kind of spooky. Although I love spooky imagery, but on this one right here, where they're kind of like little dolls and little things like that. I think I wanted it more, you know, they're toys, you know. It's more like a little gathering, you know, like a play date or something. Okay, there we go. That's what I'm looking for, I think. A little bit of a scene out in our secret by invitation only play date. Yeah. Alright, anyway, let's take a closer look here. Kind of a magical little area, kind of with deep space, you know, the depiction of deep space at least, just going through grayscale. I think it's a fairly rich surface here, and it's really void of, you know, anything but the most subtle hue possible. Not that you can't, you know, add some color into something like this, but I think it's fairly rich in terms of the textures and whatnot, and the variation of value within this scene. So, anyways, I'm holding it up here because, you know, when I do this, it gets glare on it. But hope you enjoyed it. I'll get this posted, and yeah, it's probably my final Halloween scene of the year. Although I don't know, I say that, but I really love doing that type of thing. So it gives me a chance to pull out all my little private collection characters and stamps, you know, from long ago. And this one happened to be a couple of them that I had never used before. So, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning into the channel. If you like what you see, you can always check us out on Stampscapes.com.